27%. That's how full Lake Mead is right now, the emptiest America's largest reservoir has ever been. In the 9 decades, anyone has been measuring it. Picture the boat ramps at Hoover's edge, the ones built for a lake nearly 200 feet higher than this. They've been stranded above dry rock for years now. This is the day the rock got a little drier. The old record stood for 4 years. This one didn't break it by a foot. It didn't break it by a foot of a foot. Measured in elevation, Lake Mead landed just above 1,040 feet on August 7th, beating the previous low, set back in July 2022, by roughly 1/10 of a foot, less than the length of your thumb. A headline gets written either way. Record low sounds the same whether it's crushed by 10 feet or nicked by 1 inch. Same words. Very different lake. So did anything actually change on August 7th? Or did a number just barely cross a line someone drew on a chart 14 years ago? Ask a hydrologist that question, and the answer isn't what you'd expect from someone whose job is tracking a drying lake. Jack Schmidt, who directs the Center for Colorado River Studies at Utah State, calls a broken record a teaching moment, not because the record itself matters, but because of what people do right after it's broken. They ask why, and usually the honest answer is, the record was never the important number. It's a marker on the way to a different one. Schmidt isn't being dismissive when he calls the record a teaching moment. He's pointing at something the headline skips past. The reason this keeps happening isn't a mystery, and it isn't going away on its own. The world now is warmer, with less runoff, he says. We really are in uncharted territory. Not a 1-year drought, a math problem nobody rewrote when the inputs changed. That's the context. The number that actually matters inside it is a different one entirely. 1,035 feet. Lake Mead sat just above 1,040 feet on August 7th. Do the subtraction. That's not a decade of buffer. That's about 5.5 feet. 12 of Hoover Dam's 17 turbines physically cannot generate power below 1,035 feet. Not run less efficiently. Cannot run. Picture a drinking straw in a glass. Tip it, sip it. Doesn't matter how hard you pull. Once the liquid drops below where the straw's tip sits, nothing more comes up. Those 12 turbines sit at a fixed elevation inside the dam. The water either reaches them or it doesn't. Cross 1,035 and Hoover doesn't produce a little less power. It loses roughly 70% of it almost overnight. And that's on top of ground Hoover has already lost. The dam's total output today is already 40 to 50% lower than it was back in 2000, when Mead was full and nobody worried about a straw running dry. 70% more would come off a number that's already been cut nearly in half. The Bureau of Reclamation's own July forecast put that crossing somewhere in the next 12 months, maybe by next spring, maybe later, depending on a winter nobody can predict yet. So why is a river this big running this short in the first place? Not one bad year. The Colorado River used to reliably deliver around 15 million acre-feet of water annually. Today's average is closer to 12 million, and every water agreement, every allocation, every promise made to 7 states and 2 countries was signed assuming the bigger number. J.B. Hamby, who chairs the Colorado River Board of California, called this month's low extremely significant and extremely concerning. Federal regulators are now floating cuts of up to 3 million acre-feet a year through 2036 to try to stop the bleeding. Cuts Arizona's Governor Katie Hobbs has already called unacceptable. Nobody involved agrees on how to fix it. Everybody agrees the lake keeps dropping while they argue. 3 million acre-feet. 7 states, 1 river that can't cover what's already been promised. You've probably never thought about the fact that your electricity bill has a countdown clock attached to it. It does now. This is the point in the story where it would be easy to skip past the people actually trying to fix it. So don't. Crews have already started retrofitting Hoover's turbines to keep running at lower water pressure. The upgrades won't stop the drop, but they change the math when it happens. Instead of losing 70% of Hoover's power at 1,035 feet, the retrofitted turbines cut that closer to 58%. And the newest units are designed to keep spinning down to 950 feet, a level the dam hasn't needed to plan for in its entire 90-year history. That's real. Engineers didn't wait around for the lake to hit bottom before doing something about it. And that deserves to be said plainly. It's also not a fix. It buys time against a water problem with a machine solution. And the water problem hasn't slowed down to wait for it. Lake Mead and Lake Powell combined, the two reservoirs holding the entire river's reserve, dropped to their lowest combined storage in July since 1957. The backup plan is running on the same shrinking account as the plan it's backing up. Retrofit every turbine in the building, and you still haven't added a single gallon back to the river. So who actually pays for that math? Not California, not the grid in the abstract, a specific set of people, most of whom have never set foot on Hoover Dam. Roughly 200 miles from the dam itself, Overton Power District keeps the lights on for about 19,000 customers spread across Mesquite, Bunkerville, Logandale, and Overton. Small desert towns strung along Nevada's eastern edge, a lot of them retirees on fixed incomes who moved out here specifically because it was affordable. Historically, roughly a quarter of Overton's power came from Hoover. Cheap, stable, decades-old hydropower, the kind utility planners used to build entire rate structures around because it was never supposed to run out. Last year, before Mead even reached this month's record, Hoover deliveries to Overton dropped 15%. Not 70, 15. That alone doubled what the district had to pay to replace it. 15% is a rounding error compared to what 1,035 feet would do. It was still enough to force a small public utility, serving towns most of the country has never heard of, into buying power on the open market at whatever the market happened to be charging that week. The same volatile, weather-driven pricing that has nothing to do with how reliable a small desert co-op has been for 90 years. Everything that we don't get from Hoover has to be bought from our market contract at a far higher rate, says Melissa Garcia, Overton's CEO. Not a hypothetical rate, a rate she's already paying, on a shortfall a fraction the size of what 1,035 feet would cause. Multiply 15% damage by the 70% still sitting on the table, and you start to understand why Arizona Power Authority's Jordi Fuentes has publicly floated numbers ranging from rates roughly tripling to, in his words, an 8 times increase under the worst plausible scenario. He's not a random commentator. His entire job is buying replacement power for Arizona utilities when Hoover comes up short. He's quoting the number he'd actually have to pay. The range is wide because the timing is genuinely unknown. The direction isn't in question at all. A lot of you are already typing this into the comments before I even get there. Isn't this really about AI? Fair question. Let's actually answer it instead of dodging it. Data centers are not pulling water out of Lake Mead. That's simply not how they're built out here. The biggest wave of Nevada data center construction is clustered near Reno and the Tahoe-Reno Industrial Center, roughly 400 miles north, on a completely different watershed than the Colorado River system feeding Mead. But water and electricity are two different questions. And on the electricity side, the audience's instinct isn't wrong. It's just aimed at the wrong pipe. 12 new data center projects alone are requesting close to 5,900 megawatts of power in Nevada. Hoover Dam's entire generating capacity at full pool is 2,080 megawatts. That's not a typo. The data centers now under construction want nearly 3 times what Hoover produces when the lake is completely full. And they want it from the same overstretched regional grid that now has to absorb Hoover's shortfall too. Data centers accounted for 22% of Nevada's electricity use in 2024. State regulators project that reaching 35% by 2030. Inside the same decade, the Bureau of Reclamation says Hoover could be running at barely half strength. Nobody's stealing your water, at least not from this lake. That part of the theory doesn't hold up here. But it's worth being precise instead of just dismissive. Those same Nevada data centers are projected to need close to 9,650 acre-feet of water a year for cooling by 2033, drawn from their own local groundwater near Reno, not the Colorado River. That's real water, real stress, just on a different river system than the one this channel usually covers. Different problem doesn't make either one less true. Something is absolutely competing with you for the power that used to be cheap. So circle back to that 1/10 of a foot for a second. By itself, it's almost nothing. A rounding error dressed up as a headline. But records like this one aren't dangerous because of how far they fall. They're dangerous because of what they're standing next to. This one is standing 5.5 feet from a line that cuts a major American dam's power output by more than half, on a timeline the government itself now measures in months, not decades, feeding a grid that's simultaneously being asked to absorb one of the fastest electricity demand spikes the Southwest has ever seen. None of those three things caused each other. All three are now happening at once, to the same stretch of river, to the same handful of utilities, to the same customers who had no vote in any of it. Overton Power District is already spending money it didn't budget for. Lincoln County, further north, is racing to build its own solar to get off Hoover dependency before the number gets worse. Neither of them controls the water level, neither of them controls the weather. Both of them are stuck reading a lake gauge the way the rest of us read a bank balance before payday. Neither utility gets a vote on when winter storms show up in the Rockies either. That's the part that doesn't make it into the rate hike letters. The number driving all of this isn't a policy choice anyone in Overton or Pioche made. It's snowpack, 7 states away, that hasn't fallen the way it used to. The next record Lake Mead sets almost certainly won't be measured in feet anymore. At this point, on this slope, the next one will be measured in inches. Inches don't make headlines. They also won't stop showing up on an electric bill in Overton, or Boulder City, or Phoenix. Whether anyone's watching the lake gauge that week or not. Will there be a single day you can point to and say, that's when it happened? Almost certainly not. Nobody's getting a news alert the moment the gauge reads 1035, it'll just be a Tuesday. A utility board will quietly approve a rate increase. A retiree in Bunkerville will open an envelope and do the math twice, because the first number looked wrong. That's what crossing a threshold actually looks like from the ground, not a headline, a bill. Those stranded boat ramps from the opening won't move an inch when it happens either. They've already done their job. They told you the story a decade before the turbines will. If you want to know the moment this actually crosses 1035, not when the forecast says it might, but when it does, subscribe, because that's the number this channel is going to keep tracking foot by foot, and eventually inch by inch, until it either stops falling or someone finally has to explain why it didn't.